Hello, this is Dr. Richard Hofer. I'm here to answer your questions about predictions and forecasting for nonprofits. Many of these thoughts were sparked by an article I read by Paul Safo from 2007 called 6 Rules for Effective Forecasting. Now, what is prediction? Prediction is completely accurate telling what's going to happen in the future. I predict, says the seer, that you will win $1 million. But prediction that is completely accurate is possible only in the world in which events are preordained and no amount of action in the present can influence future outcomes. That's a quote from Paul Safo. So predictions really don't happen very often. When you read about predictions, such as Edward Case or some of the people in the past or even the present, they're predicting something will happen at a certain time and a certain date. That's unusual, and they're frequently proven wrong. Most predictions are kind of vague, sort of like, you will have many good things happen to you in the coming year. Well, that's probably true. So it's not really a very good prediction, but it's something that you can look back and say, wow, I heard many good things were going to happen to me this year, and look, they did. That's not the kind of prediction that we want for nonprofits or the organizations that we help run. Prediction is concerned with future certainty. All right? And that, as we've just talked about, doesn't happen all that often. And it can only happen if nothing can alter what is predicted. Predictions may or may not come true, but there's no particular logical reason for them happening. It's like I just see in my mind that this is going to happen. So that's also, again, we want to, in management, figure out the logic behind what we think is going to happen. So even though the terms predictions and forecasts are oftentimes used interchangeably, Safo wants to make this really clear distinction between the two of them. So why do we forecast? Well, if a hurricane is coming your way, you want to know this so that you can take action. But even the best forecast of a tornado or a hurricane coming ashore it isn't 100% accurate, right? So they always have on the weather maps, they show a zone or sort of a cone of likelihood, and that the straight line is the most likely outcome, but it's not the only one. Something may happen, it may change, so there's no 100% certainty going on here. But one reason that we forecast is to avoid disasters. And this is true in organizations as well as in the weather. So if we're starting to see something happen now, we can extrapolate and forecast what will happen if we don't do something to change. For example, we may run out of money, or clients may go away, or on the other end, we may end up with many more clients than we can handle. And what would we do that? These are all reasons why we conduct forecasts. Now, in the short run, a lot of things are not changeable. The weather today is what it is today. Not much is going to happen right now. But many other things are changeable over time. The amount of revenue you get, what your job prospects are. Should you invest in education? Well, you can forecast that your pay will be much higher if you have a master's degree than a bachelor's degree. But that won't happen overnight. So you think about forecasts in a way as leading you down a path to the future. Forecasts allow us to impact that future by seeing what's coming and making changes now. And that's the important thing, is that it allows us to sort of see into the future, at least one particular future, and make changes to ensure that that good thing we want happens. So forecasts require models of what causes the change. So let's take a simple example. If you want to increase revenue, which is represented by that middle circle, then there's several different things you can do. You can write more successful grants. You can get more donors. You can try to get bigger donations from the current donors, or you can have more earned revenue. All of these things would result in increased revenue. So as you make a forecast of what your revenues are going to be, you might want to then say, well, it looks like grants are going to be getting more difficult, not easier. So perhaps we need to focus more on earned revenue or on getting our current donors to have bigger donations. In this way, you can look at your goal or what the variable is that you're trying to forecast, increase revenue, and it will help you make plans in order to ensure that the revenue will increase. So this is a model of what causes increased revenue. You could come up with a similar model for what causes client number fluctuations. Are we going to have more clients? Are we going to have fewer clients? Create a model. Forecasts can be based on just a single variable. That is, there's just one thing that affects revenue, or there's just one thing that impacts the number of clients. Or the forecast can look at lots of variables and come up with many very different possibilities depending on how your model looks. Forecasts can also be different based on the amount of time that you're looking back or the technique that you're using. Forecasts oftentimes come up with what outcomes are more reasonable and which are less reasonable. So for example, going back to the increased revenue model that we had, one of the factors there is more successful grants. Well, how is that going to happen? Well, you might forecast that you're going to hire someone or a volunteer is going to just step in and say, hey, I know how to write grants, and I've written $10 gazillion grants, and so I'm going to step in and help you get a $10 gazillion grant too. That might happen, but your forecast probably wouldn't say that that's the most likely outcome. However, you might say, well, if we're going to increase income or revenue, then maybe we should hire someone who has considerable experience in writing grants or in soliciting donors' donations, things like that. You can help in your forecast to determine what's the more reasonable and what's the less reasonable possible outcomes. Going back to the weather forecast, it's very rare that you see that a weather forecaster is saying, I'm 100% sure it's going to rain a week from now, because there's just so many variables that have impact there. But they might say there's a 70% chance of rain a week from now, but a 90% chance of rain tomorrow. So the forecast models can give you different levels of certainty, but they're very, very rarely 100% certain. According to Sappho, forecasting looks at how hidden currents in the present signal possible changes in the future. When you're doing forecasts or you're reading somebody else's forecast, you want to try to really hone in on what is it that the currents that they're seeing, how are they going to change things in the future. A forecast helps you understand what impact a change that you might make now will have on the future. You conduct a forecast, for example, about what might occur if you make a change, and you'll get several answers if you have a good forecast. Here's the past leading up to right now, and you have a time period, an inflection point, and then your forecast gives you several different answers as to what might happen based on that change, or based on if you don't change anything. Things might increase, they might decrease, or they might stay pretty much the same. The width of those lines diverging there at that inflection point, that's the range of forecast outcomes. And these depend on the assumptions you make, the methods you use, the amount of change that you make, and the weights of all of these variables and factors. If you make a small change now, it might not have much of an impact for quite some time, but then it might have a big impact later on. The sooner you make a change, the more likely it is that you're going to see bigger change down the future. The forecaster's task is to map uncertainty For in a world where our actions in the present influence the future, uncertainty is opportunity. If we don't know what's going to happen, then that gives us opportunity to make a change. It gives us opportunity to think about what causes change in our organization, in our world, in our society, and what we can do about it. A small change now can make large changes possible down the road. Forecasts allow us to leverage time to our advantage. It's similar to the idea of compound interest. If you put money in the bank and you get a certain amount of interest, and you just leave it there and the interest accumulates and then you get interest on the interest and things like that, then that's allowing time to be on your side to grow that pot of money. Similarly, forecasts allow us to leverage our current time to pick the best choice now to have a certain amount of change in the future. So what makes for an accurate forecast? Forecasts are made based on assumptions and empirically derived relationships. That is, they must be logical. The forecaster must be able to articulate and defend that logic. Okay? So if you're making a prediction, you don't have to explain the logic. You just say, I see this happening. But a forecaster has to say, well, if we do X, that will lead to Y, which will lead to W, which will lead to Z, and that's what we want. And when you defend that logic, then everyone else can critique it and decide if they think that's true, if it's accurate, how accurate it might be, and things like that. So the forecaster has to be able to articulate and defend the logic behind the forecast. In addition, the consumer of the forecast has to understand enough of the process and the logic to make an independent assessment of its quality. That's why when you present your own forecast, you should talk about what went into your assumptions and the whole process that you use to come up with what looks like a very solid number. But underneath that solid number is a lot of squishiness, most likely. And in the end, how close our forecast is to what actually happens is a matter of having an accurate model, applying our time leverage appropriately, and of course some luck helps. So as you think about and use forecasts, think deeply about what causes the outcome. Revenue, expenses, the number of clients, whatever it is that you're doing the forecast on. What makes that number change? Thinking about the reasons for the change that you need to do to set up a good forecast is actually more valuable than whatever number you come up with. Forecasting forces you to put numbers to vague thoughts so that you come away with more accurate forecasts, more helpful planning, and better management choices. I hope you found this short discussion about forecasting and predictions to be helpful. I hope that it will help you be able to come up with better forecasts on your own, and certainly to understand better why you would have forecasting.